With the Silver Lake ditch, it's our main source of water for Long's Gardens. I'm lucky enough to farm on land that my family's been on in Boulder for 117 years. So we've gone through evolution of how we irrigate, but we do irrigate with sprinklers primarily. And Silver Lake Ditch is our source. Silver Lake Ditch is one of the shorter ditches in our area, but we are 9.45 miles from where we start. The head gate is about 1 mile upstream from the mouth of Boulder Canyon. And then the terminus is at Mesa Reservoir north of Boulder. Silver Lake is up in the Indian Peaks Wilderness. Silver Island and Green and all that are all part of the City of Boulder watershed, but the Silver Lake Ditch has storage rights in Silver and Island reservoirs. We occasionally get our water up from there, but it's usually like most water things, smoke and mirrors and exchanges and all of that. But we're taking water out of Boulder. When J.P. Maxwell and George Oliver set out to construct the Silver Lake Ditch in 1888, which, keeping in mind, that was pretty late in development, they needed to gain enough elevation to serve their target area, which is what we now consider West and North Boulder. The ditch was an integral part of Maxwell and Oliver's plans to develop the area, which included Mapleton Hill, the Newlands neighborhood, and the areas farther north. So in order to do that, they needed to maintain the elevation, and the first stretch of the ditch is primarily conveyed through a series of originally flumes. So you can see at the top there, it was wooden flumes. Eventually in the late 40s, early 50s, it was changed to pipe. That in itself is a challenge. You can see sometimes we resort to interesting things like patching. Jim's a very good patcher as well as others, but maintaining a ditch hanging on the side of a cliff is always a challenge, and that's a whole nother subject. But part of it is keep in mind that our ditch traverses pretty much first hogback. It's hanging on the side of the hill. So a lot of it, in order to keep from losing all of our water, because we're crossing through pretty rocky country. You can see on the side there, if you look at the side of that, we've got a lot of rock. We aren't like a lot of ditches on the plains where we've got soil and we've hopefully got clay that we can seal a ditch. We've got springs that are running through the hillside. And so we've found over the years that lining is really the best way for us. We've been doing lining for over 40 years now. In the beginning, there wasn't a whole lot available, and so we've used polyethylene and butyl rubber, but because of the lack of UV resistance, those weren't very viable solutions. But once 45 mil reinforced polypropylene lining materials became available, that became our liner of choice, and that's what you see here, available with white or black or tan. So sometimes that made a difference as to how it fit into the landscape, particularly as we got into the more urban sections of our ditch. And so we have liner installations with the RPP that have been in place for about 23 years and are actually doing very well. But we just recently purchased a different material called Aqua 40 co-extruded, which is less expensive, it's more flexible, it's lighter weight, which, as Elizabeth mentioned, a lot of our ditch is not accessible by any kind of machinery. This is hand carry and hand work and all of that. So the lighter weight is important. We're going to see it's a 40 mil reinforced polyethylene, and we're going to see how that works. So we haven't tried it yet.
Liners not only minimize water loss, but create better relations with our non-shareholder neighbors and help us avoid liability issues. Good liners make good neighbors. The liner shown on the left here covers an area where these affected neighbors experimented unsuccessfully with bentonite and PAM to stop the seepage. So this was our ultimate solution. Typically, when property owners complain about seepage, we in Silver Lake enter into an agreement in which the affected property owners will pay for the materials, and our ditch company volunteers to provide the installation labor. So gathering a bunch of folks together creates the community, gets the job done. This creates a win-win solution, eliminating seepage for the property owner and keeps water in the ditch. And by using volunteer labor, it reduces maintenance costs, which helps in the end keep our ditch assessments low. Occasionally, property owner will pay all the costs, including hired labor, but always with ditch company oversight. We had a couple of instances where one property chose a wider liner than we normally do, and we wanted to bury it into trenches along each side. A second property ran a piece of butyl liner through a leaky culvert with our then blessing. But as Catherine indicated, the butyl doesn't last very long. Some property owners find liners unsightly and they like to do something to hide it. So this shot here shows a stone wall that was built. There's a liner underneath all that. The difficulty, of course, is that you can't find a leak. It's hard to find a leak, and fixing it is even more costly. So again, we usually enter in an agreement with these parties to put the onus of maintenance on that party. Over the years, the Silver Lake Ditch Company has installed about 1.5 miles of our 9.4 ditch is covered in liner. Most of it's in the mountains where the fractured stone is, as Catherine pointed out. In this picture, you can see a white liner, and underneath it is black butyl liner. The white is the reinforced polypropylene. And in between, you see some red strap iron. That was the structure that was put in to support the old butyl liner before it disintegrated, basically, and we covered it with the new stuff. This is a picture of the repair crew after the flood, repairing that liner, and then the final result down below, we had restored that entire wall. Sometimes we have some real challenges. This was a situation where we had a 10-foot culvert. You can see a little piece of it there, rusty iron, totally rusted out. The big rocks on the right were pressing against the concrete wall, which fractured it. And we had to come up with a Band-Aid for a season. So this liner actually goes through that culvert with expansion bands to hold it in place, and then it's sealed at various ends. So we do have interesting challenges from time to time with these liners. Catherine's Long's Garden is our staging area. When we order a liner, it comes these days rolled up. 600-foot liner is 50 pound foot liner, 350, weighs about 600 pounds. So they're no small item. Putting it into a truck, this is a 12-foot wide liner that we use on our rather small ditch. Here we're showing putting it in the truck. We fold it lengthwise, so it's 4 feet wide, widthwise, I guess. Once it's cut to length, we fold it in thirds, and now we're loading it on the truck in accordion fashion, like this. So then we get to the site, and it can be pulled right out of the truck by our intrepid crew here. Kind of a Chinese dragon effort coming up the hillside. So the truck's down the hill, 500 feet down below us, and we manhandle this thing up. This is probably a 600-pound line. So a dozen of your good friends are nice to have. Typical liner installation involves surveying, site prep, cleaning up the site. Materials involved, besides the liner itself, would be rebar for the side pieces. We usually put side supports, 10-foot pieces down each side, and stakes, wire the whole things together, and concrete to terminate the ends. This particular liner was put in a wood timberline section of ditch. These were the folks that tried the PAM and the bentonite unsuccessfully, so we actually attached this with metal straps that were screwed into the wood. This is another situation where we put liner in a concrete lined section of our ditch. In the foreground, you can see some 10-foot pieces of 1/2-inch rebar. We run those down each side and fold the liner around behind it. Here's our crew Now, with is making that installation, wrapping the material around the rebar. And we have people tying it off. You can see on the right-hand picture, they're running wires from the stake driven in the ground, down, poke through the liner and around the rebar. The fellow with the gloves has his hands on that. That's how we anchor it in place. These folks, you can see the wire we're using is 10 gauge galvanized wire, fairly heavy. And we start tying the liner from the bottom end. You're looking up the ditch upstream, right from the bottom and working up to the top. So the liner width, as I say, for our ditch is about 12 feet wide. The liner's got to be suspended in the ditch, and it's loose in the ditch. Don't want to stretch it, make it tight. This is again is the reinforced polypropylene. It's fairly stiff. The weather's cold, you really have some troubles with it. When you encounter corners, this polypropylene does not stretch. So you put the outside rebars in first, come around the corner, and the inside, as you can see the wrinkles in the left picture here. You have to take up that extra liner, and you can see it's kind of wrinkled and loose fitting in the bottom. That's the proper way to do it. If you put tension on these, they don't sit right. Picture on the right is another section of liner we put into a pipe. This location was very leaky after the flood. We had to reestablish a ditch through sand. So we covered that porous sand with the folded liner you can see here. You're looking upstream into the pipe. There's an expansion band 4 inches wide inside the pipe that holds this pipe. And then the wrinkles are introduced here to make it go around the corner properly. This is a way to join two sections of liner. Since that material is so heavy, as I mentioned, if we have a 700 feet to line, you do it in sections. So this is a common termination, joining the white and the black liners. That trench is 6 inches wide, about 4 inches deep. Crosswise, a belt trench in the ditch. Each end of the liner must extend into the concrete and be completely coated with the concrete. Here's the termination of that the ultimate termination across the earthen ditch. So this is a little different situation than in a case where we have a concrete line ditch. Here we're terminating the liner into the concrete using strap iron and anchor screws put into the concrete. Patching this material, not many adhesives stick to reinforced polypropylene. So our technique we have is a pair of match drilled plates. So the upper end, they're made of G10 or stiff material like that, metal will work too. They're match drilled at home. You cut a hole through the liner. You have to enlarge the hole you want to patch enough to get one of the halves behind the liner, and then you match the holes and fasten the two together. There's no goop involved, no sealant. It worked quite well. This is one of our disasters that we had. This is a pipe that was lined with butyl liner that became disintegrated by the sun. You're looking into the pipe. This is the outlet end of the pipe. The upper left corner is looking at the inside, the inlet end of the pipe. You can see this is a liner that was contracted out. We did not install this one. But you can see the metal rod ties inside. It's a expansion system to hold it inside the culvert, which all came apart. The liner split and the water came through and dislodged the liner. The lower right corner is looking at the outlet end. We were called about 11 o'clock one night that the ditch was overflowing west of the city. And we went up and there was a big balloon sticking out of this thing. We pierced it with a pocket knife, and this is the result. So we wound up actually taking that completely out. This is nice picture of a finished liner. We don't always have these disasters, but they do occasionally happen, and we're anxious to try our new liner material. So our main goal is to try to save as much water as we can, and this is Silver Lake's way of going about it.
Well, I live in a house that a postman named Bill Herzer built with his own 2 hands, starting in 1916, when he also planted an orchard. The ditch runs along the western edge of the orchard, and when I bought the house, he called it Orchard House. The basement level floor of the house was concrete with runnels or grooves, like 4 inches deep, to handle the water flowing down from the ditch all the time, at least when the ditch was running through fissures. It was like a spring house. So the first step was to line the ditch so that the basement could be made to be usable. It's not a big house. We used the black polypropylene 25 years ago. And it was like a barn raising, actually. All kinds of folks came out to help drag that stuff into place and secure it. I was worried that a big old crack willow that had sprung up in the ditch would be starved of water. It survived and continues to produce massive amounts of what we ditch folk call angel hair. These bright pink roots from willows that can literally block the ditch if you don't keep up with cutting it out. Herzer had used flood irrigation to water the orchard, but I put in a pump house and a system of mostly Netafim, the Israeli designed irrigation that makes every drop of water count. But it requires quite a filtration system. So turns out the hardest part of ditch work is getting people to care. The water comes from several sources, and Jim took us up on a hike to the Silver Lake. It's a beautiful, wild place. But the water is a living water, no chlorine, filled with nutrients. It's a great gift, but it's also a responsibility. Most of my fellow ditch members, because the water goes with the land, just don't care. They are urban dwellers with generally no connection to agricultural and irrigation ditches. They consider it an annoyance, if not a source of fear, particularly with the concept of keeping it clean and clear so that backup flooding doesn't happen. Involving them with liner projects acquaints them with that wonderful water and the complexities of delivering it. And working together really creates a sense of community and the satisfaction of good, hard, neighborly work. Without the work of volunteers for prep work, pruning, raking, smoothing, the cost of lining and maintaining that ditch would be much, much higher. The liners are minimizing loss of the precious water. When I can just get folks out there with their feet in that cold mountain water, it feels so darn good. But unfortunately, most of our volunteer work is still done by our independent ditch rider, Elizabeth Avery, and the board. We do go through some Epsom salts during the season, I will tell you. And we'll keep working on it, but that's just the barn raising kind of aspect of the liner thing has been a good way to get people involved.
How much area do you have covered with the
Polypropylene.
Polypropylene, about 1.5 miles of the ditch.
How many years has it taken you to do 1.5 miles?
Long time.
Well, quite a long time. I think some of the older stuff we have in service is approaching 25 years old of this polypropylene.
So 1.5 miles, 25 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
some of it in big chunks.
This is great stuff. I got lots of questions, but the one that's killing me is the flume that's hanging on the wall, which I've seen before. You guys report on that stuff. Question's killing me. Is there a easement for hanging off a wall? Go ahead.
I don't know.
I've never even, just sort of dawned on me.
Well, there's a prescriptive easement, sure, so it's what we make it, I guess. So nobody's ever questioned that, Sean. Don't.
No,
Don't
open a can of
just
worms.
dawned on me.
How do you
I
measure
guess
that?
I've always thought of it on the ground, going all the way down, but
Right.
it's not on ground.
No,
I'm asking.
yeah, all right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
it's